This is Maureen Kafkas, the Brain BS coach, here to tell you about the episode today. In this fourth episode of the Women Who Inspire Me series on the Brain BS podcast, I speak with author Kim Cantin. She wrote a book called Where Yellow Flowers Bloom, depicting the tragic story of how her family was forever changed by the Monticeto Mudslide that occurred January 9th, 2018. Her journey since then has required her to listen to her intuition, trust the process, and believe in divine timing. So sit back, settle in, listen to her story. It's a really important one. Episode number 143 of the Brain BS podcast, Where the Yellow Flowers Bloom with Kim Cantin. Do you want more out of your life but not exactly sure what that might be? Are you longing for something but can't quite put your finger on what it is? That is the universe speaking to you, and it is time to listen up. I'm your host, Maureen Kafkas, the Brain BS coach. I created the Brain BS podcast to help people define what success means to them and show them how to get it. I help you to let go of fear and doubt and prepare your nervous system for success. I show you how to understand your own energy and to trust yourself to make all the decisions. If you are ready to go inward and stop looking outside yourself for all the answers, this is the podcast for you. Now let's get started. Hello and welcome back to the Brain BS podcast. This is Maureen Kafkas here, the Brain BS coach, and I have a really special guest today. I know I call everyone special, but I do think that this is a special guest. Before I have you introduce yourself, Kim, I'm going to just tell the audience how I learned about you. Denise Cooper is a friend of mine, and she's in the Santa Barbara Bucket Brigade, which is an organization in Santa Barbara that was a huge source of support to you when you went through the story we're about to share with the audience. And she told me about your book, Where Yellow Flowers Bloom. And I read it in 2 sittings because it was so good, so inspiring, and so moving. So I just want everyone to know about the book, and we'll put the link to that in the show notes, and we'll be referring to it throughout the episode. But now I'm going to let Kim Cantin introduce herself and to begin sharing her story.
Well, thank you, Maureen. Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here. So, yeah, my name is Kim Cantin, and I'm a resident of Santa Barbara, and 57 years old. I was living the dream and living in Santa Barbara in 2018 with my 2 children, my 17-year-old son, my 14-year-old daughter, and my amazing husband, Dave, who was 49. And we had a goofy Irish setter dog. And we were both career people, my husband and I. The kids were active in their schools and we were active in the community. So that's who I was. And that's really kind of pivoted, right, to who I am now, because there was a tragedy that occurred on January 9th of 2018. So who am I now? I'm a person who is, been through a tragedy and working to get on the other side of it. And I think I'm getting there. And I'm an author now. And that's because I didn't have anything to write about before. And I certainly did with what happened here. So that's who I am.
Yeah. Well, I'm so honored that you came on the podcast and that you're going to share your story, because it's a beautiful story in so many different ways. And one of the biggest things that stands out to me is how the entire community, and not just the local, like all the things that lined up to help you and all the people that lined up. I mean, it has to be divine or miraculous. Like there's no other.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So why don't you share the story about what happened and however you want to present it?
Sure. So just to level set with everyone, so in December of 2017, there was a big wildfire. It was called the Thomas Fire. It was the largest wildfire at the time in California history. And it was roaring from Ventura towards Santa Barbara. And I think it took out 300,000 acres. And as it did that, it took out all the trees and the shrubbery and the foliage, right? And left behind big car-sized boulders that hung precariously on the hillsides. And we were evacuated 3 times, I believe, during the Thomas Fire to with threat of losing our home. And then we got back into the home. I think it was December 22nd. It was the holidays that didn't happen. The mailboxes were taped up. Packages didn't arrive, but the house was saved. And we were like, whew, we're here. And then the first week of January, they forecasted some heavy rain. And just to go back to the Thomas fire, whenever they put an app that you could get on your phone and use on your computer as well as watch the news, and it was called Aware and Beware. Yeah, Aware and Beware. And it would blast an update of evacuate now. So that's why we evacuated 3 times during the Thomas fire, and it was on our phone. So when we heard of the heavy rain, we continued to monitor the news, and we continued to monitor our Aware and Beware. And we were not in the mandatory evacuation zone, but we prepped the house extensively. We put sandbags up, we checked the back line, and I even got a hotel room for that night in case it came down heavy, and we had our cars staged so that we could get out quick if there was a problem. And so we thought we'd be fine. And we found out we weren't, because at about 3:30 in the morning, 3:15, 3:30 in the morning, my husband and I awoke to heavy, heavy rain on the roof. We got up. We told the kids, get dressed, we're going to get out. We realized that there was, it was torrential rain. I think it was half an inch in 15 minutes. But sadly, we didn't make it out in time. When what happened was part of the mountain came crashing down. There's a bend and a curve in the creek that was across the lane from us, and the boulders that came down that had nothing to hold them in place kind of backed up the underpass. So there was a 30-foot wave that plumed up almost like feathers of a peacock feather, and it was filled with big boulders and downed 100-year-old trees and mud and debris, and it crashed down on our house and our neighbor's house, totally obliterating it, but it obliterated it with my family in it. And I washed away 200 yards and was found in an intersection, severely injured and wrapped in electrical wire. My daughter was washed away 100 yards, and she was buried alive for 6 hours under 20 feet of mud, part of a roof, a couple cars, electrical transformer, until her miraculous rescue that was shown all around the world, because people couldn't believe that, when the rescuers finally heard her screams, she was screaming and screaming, but it was muffled because of the mud. It took them 2 hours to get her out, but film crews were there, and it was incredulous to know someone could have survived. She had a tiny pocket of air the size of half a volleyball in front of her mouth and nose, with a little straw-sized hole out to the outside. And they offered to say, hey, we'll carry you to the ambulance, and she goes, no, I'll walk. And it was just, the world got to see this incredible, miraculous rescue. But most tragically, my husband and my son and my dog died. My husband was found down by the beach. The dog was found by Lauren. He was a 90-pound Irish setter. He was found 6 foot up a tree, crushed. And my son perished too, but sadly, he was one of the missing that they had a hard time recovering. So 23 people died that night. One of which was two of which were my family members, my husband, my son, and 2 were missing. And that was a 2-year-old baby girl, Lydia, and my son, Jack. And I think 400 homes were damaged. 62 homes were totally destroyed. It went over 30 square miles, and the freeway was closed for 10 days. So it was a massive natural disaster. And never in a million years would I anticipated, when I went to bed that night, that my house would be obliterated. Nothing's left. Everything was washed away. My passports, my identification, birth certificates, driver's license, kids' art, the family photos, the wedding album, everything was gone. And I ended up in a hospital for 3 weeks, learning how to walk again and having a couple surgeries. And my daughter was in another hospital. So it was really a night of the unimaginable. So that's what happened, right? And
I'm going to
then,
stop you just for 1 second, because I also think it's remarkable the way you're able to talk about this.
mhm,
Right? Because
yeah.
I don't know, like, I mean, I just, when you tell that story, I'm just like, oh my gosh. I mean, it's just like, clearly you are supposed to be talking about it though, to be
I
able to,
think so. I
yeah,
think
so I
so.
think that's where strength comes from or something, because it's pretty remarkable that you are able to do that.
Well, people get pretty stunned. They're like, "Whoa, I wasn't expecting that." I wasn't, you know, uh, I got in a car accident. No, it just gets worse and worse and worse. And it was really unexpected. But I just did a talk on Sunday um, to about 50 people, and I do think I am supposed to talk about it because some people who lost their children, lost a son or lost someone near dear to them, they said, "Thank you, I needed to hear this talk." So I think to me, it's putting some meaning against the tragedy, which is a good thing, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's really all you can do.
Right, right, right.
Yeah. So, I mean, no, I think it's beautiful that you're doing it. Okay. I didn't want to interrupt, but I do think it's worth noting that you've obviously done a lot of work on this, internal
Yes,
work, and
yeah,
really reframed and came out with a way of looking at life. Like you just said, you're kind of looking at the gift in it. If there are silver lining of what
yeah,
take out of this, that's somewhat positive.
exactly. And I did do a lot of work, and I told my daughter, "We've never been through such a thing. We're going to need a lot of help." And we invested in our efforts, right, from grief talk therapy to EMDR trauma therapy to somatic touch healing to Reiki to using intuitives. um, so many things helped in processing this massive event for my daughter and I think the book actually was very cathartic for me. I got to get it out and I got to then see reflectively how I went from a desperate grief into a more peaceful integration, that I'm gonna walk alongside this in my life, but it certainly becomes lighter. But really what helped, and I can mention it now if you'd like, is this community in Santa Barbara. I was witness to so much compassion by strangers that was unbelievable. There's a group called the Bucket Brigade that formed. It was neighbors helping neighbors. They were digging people out of their muddy homes when insurance says we can't tell you if there's damage until you get the mud out, and they wouldn't pay to get the mud out. But that Bucket Brigade team would go help look for Jack and baby Lydia, and Abe would run the excavator. I remember one time a wonderful volunteer, Denise. They were clearing out the creeks, and I drove by, and no one was spotting what they were hauling away. And I had a panic moment, right? Because he could have been in there, and so could baby Lydia. And Denise dropped everything and went to spot the excavator in the creek as they were clearing it out to help a grieving mother. And I didn't know Denise from before, right? So just tremendous compassion. I had a locksmith who, when I didn't have a house anymore, so I had to rent a house, and it was just my daughter and I. So we rekeyed the locks, and I went to pay the gentleman. I didn't know him, but he was a local locksmith in Santa Barbara, ESP locksmith on Upper State. And I went to pay him. He goes, "You're not paying me anything. You've lost too much already." And that simple gesture of kindness, that he used his talent for good, right? His talent in that case was locksmithing, had a healing effect on me because I felt I was being carried and nurtured when I couldn't carry and nurture myself. And that was such a gift to healing for me. And so many people came out. I mean, people became my anecdote. Um, and some of the women, I had no clothes, I had no underwear, right? They'd go shopping and bring me underwear, and they bought me a little suitcase, and they got clothes from their closet, or they went to a local store in town and said, "Does Kim shop here?" And they said yes, and they said, "Let's rebuy everything she bought in the past year," because they had it on their computer. And so I was just a witness to so much kindness, and the kindness um, helped me feel kind of enveloped in love from a community, and this community's always been great. um, but I got to witness spectacular, and
Yeah,
they
I
weren't just
was gonna say it's spectacular. I was gonna say special. I mean, there's love, and then there's like this. It's the collective love, like all
it's the
together.
collective love, and it is absolutely here. And I was lucky enough to be a recipient of that, and it's pretty darn amazing, just, and, because there's people when tragedy happens, right, or grief, they become what I call grief tourists. They pop in, pop out, right?
Mhm.
These people stayed, right? I mean, and then we started to search for my son and baby Lydia. And some of these people stayed for 3 years as we searched. 3 years, right? And
Yeah.
and, and one of them said to the other, because we had been searching for 2 years, and we visually could see there was less piles around to search, right? And so Anne Brigard was one, and Sherry Ball, and Anne would run the Earth Mover, and Sherry would spot. And as I left one day, we were kind of feeling dejected, and one of them said to the other, Anne said to Sherry, or Sherry said to Anne, "When will we know we're done?" Because they looked around and they didn't see as many piles, right? And they've been doing this for 2 years for me. And the other said, "When Kim tells us we're done." And that was the biggest gift and learning I got about grief. It wasn't on their time. They were being open, compassionate hearted people for someone who was in need on my schedule and on my time. And so now I know if I see people in grief, that's the gift I want to give them. Because some people say, "Hey, it's time to move on. It's been this long, start dating again," or whatever you're doing. No, it's all on everyone's grief is different. It's a different journey, right? It's all there.
Yeah. In coaching, we call that holding space for
Yeah.
someone, because you start out at a certain place, then you go through something like you went through, and to get to the other side, that middle part's called the liminal space. And
Mm,
sometimes people have to be in that liminal space for a very long time, and some people don't have to be. But
yeah.
like you said, it all depends on the individual, and everybody grieves at their own pace and in their
Yeah.
own way. So
Absolutely.
I think this is a great time to bring up like some of the things that happened in the book. Cause like when I was reading it, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe how long they did this for. And I have other guests on different podcast episodes, and I'm beginning to realize and get this idea that in general, us humans might be giving up on things a little bit too early.
Oh,
Because
I think we could. And
yeah,
yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about that. So,
yeah.
we had the two missing kids. One was my son, and I realized that, there had been really heroic efforts trying to look for the missing for about, 3 to 4 weeks. But then after Super Bowl Sunday, it kind of was an inactive search, right? And then I saw a house come down, and I heard the dog handlers who were there when the house came down, which was terrific, talking to one another, and they say, "Hey, we couldn't go to that pile, and we couldn't go to that pile. It was too dangerous." So I really learned, when they said they checked everything, they didn't check everything, right? And there was a lot of piles around, a lot of stuff being hauled away. So I engaged in the search, and it ended up being about 3 years. And you can imagine, you're going out there and you come up with nothing, and sometimes you just feel so dejected and sad, right? And what happened, which was, I think, kind of, there's no coincidences in life, and kind of divine timing. There were things that would show up just kind of when I needed it, or when the team needed it, that gave us that jolt of hope to keep going. And it was not only the hope to keep going, but it also helped get us in the right area. The examples are, on Valentine's Day, the second Valentine's Day that, my husband and son were up in heaven. It was about 404 days since the tragedy. I get a text from another survivor, and Julia says, "Kim, check out the Monticeto Lost and Found website. Someone found an ultrasound image that has your name on it." And I'm like, "An ultrasound image with my name on it?" I mean, I knew my stuff was sprawled out everywhere, but what's that? I go look at it. It's the ultrasound picture of my son who's missing when he was a baby in my belly.
Oh my God, I have
And
goosebumps from head to toe, and I already knew you were gonna say that, and I still got them. That's crazy.
it was crazy. Even crazier is where it was found. It was found wedged between rocks in a little plastic sleeve, the one you put in a three ring binder with kind of the openings at the top and openings at the bottom. It was wedged between rocks in the elements for 404 days by Butterfly Beach, in perfect condition. You could read Kim Cantin. She was female 34, how many weeks it was. The ultrasound was from May 17th of, I think, 2000, right? And it was so profound. It's like, that was a message of love for sure, and keep at it. And then we would find things, we would go searching, and then we would get these clues from some of the intuitives, and they say Superman's really important. And
Now
then we'd
let's talk
find
about
his,
the intuitives because you
yeah.
just brought them up. So talk about those and how they helped you to find
Sure.
them.
So I didn't have much experience with mediums or intuitives, and it's not because of lack of interest. It's I was just a busy career woman with a busy family life at home with 2 kids and a husband, and we were volunteering in the community. But intuitives started to enter my life afterwards. A friend got me to Suzanne Giesman, who's a world-renowned evidentiary medium, and said, "Would you do a reading for her?" And she said yes. And then fortuitously, a woman in one of the boutiques I know, Linda, she said, "Do you know Catherine Weisenberg?" And I'm like, "No." And she goes, "You need to." She was the back channel to the to some of the first responders, giving clues to where to look for the victims, and her clues found 2 of the victims. I'm like, "I'm all in." And so I contacted, and these people, weren't asking for a dime. They just wanted to help how they could to locate the missing kids, and they would give clues. And not only would they give clues, but when they did a reading about Jack was very communicative in spirit, and he would be saying, "I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay, Mom." And then when I said, "Well, where are you?" Right? "I want to know where you are." And he goes, "That's just a shell of me. It's not me. I'm me." And at first I was really mad because I'm like, "No, I need to find the baby I birthed, right? And get him in the cemetery with his dad." But over time during the search, I became more okay with the messages I got through spirit, through the mediums, with Jack saying, "I'm okay, I'm okay. I'm in full joy," right? "Dad's with me." Dave would say, "I got Jack, you got Lauren, and we're still a family." So the intuitives were helpful for my healing. I got to really learn clearly that we're more than our physical bodies. I truly understand and believe that our spirits go on, and that we rent a shell when we're here on earth. It's a rent a shell program. My shell has brown hair and is 5 foot tall, right? Um, Jack's shell was almost 6 foot tall, right? With sandy brown hair. We rent a shell, but our soul goes on. So I learned that through the intuitives, and the clues helped us in the search, because what they came up with and what ultimately was found of Jack's remains matched the clues. And stunning. There's 2, yeah, it was stunning. And it would get us in the right general direction. If it was Chip Teacup or Superman, I mean, we found the Superman figurine, we found Superman costume, all in the area that we should have been looking. We found the quilt. So we were getting really kind of, losing steam. That the volunteers that were coming out were probably going, "Why are we out again?" Right. And then one of them, Anne, digs out a 50-pound clump that she goes, "It's a quilt, and I made quilts." And one of the quilts that was most special to my husband was one that was a beautiful blue ocean batik fabric, and I had stitched a silhouette of my husband and my son from a picture when they did their first scuba dive together, which was really meaningful. And my husband took that quilt during the Thomas Fire evacuations of the irreplaceables he wanted with us, like with our wedding photo or wedding portrait. He took the quilt. So as Anne's digging, we open up the quilt. It's all muddy, it's been through the ringer. And that was that quilt. So it wasn't a hammer we found. It wasn't a chair we found, right? We found the very thing that had an image of Jack and Dave on it, and that was so meaningful to my husband. And that was the jolt of hope to say, keep going. Because if that was found wedged in the corner of cement hard mud, wedged between a chain link fence and the creek, so could baby Lydia, and so could Jack, right? And so we got these messages of hope that seemed to appear, and Rob Lowe went out with us one day to search as a kind of neighbor in town, and he was doing a documentary. And I said, "Well, take a pickaxe, you're coming with us." And he's like, "Why do you keep searching?" And I said, because we keep finding things. And within, I think, half an hour of him being out, he found my husband's Red Sox jersey. And he found a clump of his ties and some of his poker chips. And he goes, I get why you keep looking.
Oh my gosh, every time you tell me something that you found, I get goosebumps, like really major
I know.
goosebumps.
We did
It,
too. We
it
did
does.
too.
It feels like it was really, you were actually
Divine.
being spoken to. Yeah. I feel like Jack and Dave were right there
They were helping.
helping
I think
you.
they were helping. They were helping trying to they I don't think Jack knew exactly where he was, but he's like, it doesn't work that way. My eyes don't see like human eyes. But he would say in the readings, God told me I'll be found. And I'll be found. I'll be found. I don't know when, I don't know how, but I will be found. And that helped me too, right? Because I wanted him found yesterday. But knowing Jack wasn't a liar of a personality, he was very trustworthy. And so if he's saying definitively, matter of factly, as if he's putting a shepherd's um, hook into the ground saying, I will be found, God told me. I'm like, okay, then we're just going to keep going. So
Yeah.
the
So that
search took a
enabled
lot
you
of
to
this.
trust, right? So because
Yeah, it did.
yeah, because if we don't have that trust, then that's when we feel urgency. We need to know and we
Anxiety.
need to know
Yeah.
now, and it gets us in a different state. But when we actually believe and trust the process, which it was a process for you to trust the process, right? Because you started
Yes.
out,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah. So I think that's what inspires me the most is that you weren't necessarily drawn to all this stuff before for various
Mm-mm.
reasons, but then you really leaned on it, and it's really what helped you to find them.
You know what? I was filleted open from this tragedy, and I was open to any and all things. You know, you have more neuroplasticity when you've got trauma and your nervous system is reconfiguring, and that was a gift because I was open to everything. And so, no one thing was our silver bullet. I think it was the interconnectedness of everything. It was the people who helped. It was definitely the clues. The clues and the intuitives definitely got us where we needed to be, and it was the help of tried to get more science into it, so we had ground penetrating radar. um, we had a professor at a top 10 research university. She's a professor of anthropology. She's a she's a forensic archaeologist, and she came to help, and she had student volunteers help, and they put science into the whole mix of soil testing, and they had these special laser guns that if you pointed at, like, for an analogy, if you point this $50,000 laser gun at a chocolate chip cookie, it will tell you the composition. It will tell you how much flour, how much brown sugar, how much chocolate and vanilla are in that said cookie. So they could point it at soil to figure out what's the composition and does it have elements of human DNA in it. So we brought in the science, and then we had the canine search dogs. The dogs were terrific. And then we also brought in historical search dogs, and they're different. So a canine search dog, search and rescue, smells for flesh and blood, right? Of the deceased. We were searching for, up to 3 years, and it got to the point where there might not be any flesh and any blood anymore. And so we brought in what's called canine historical dogs, and they're trained on bone. And they went to look recently for Amelia Earhart in the South Pacific, or they looked for Thomas Jefferson's buried brother up in Monticello. So we tried to do. I said, let's put any and all resources to help us, and I think it just miraculously worked. I mean, the clues were really fundamental, and having the anthropology team was very, very, that was pivotal. They're the ones who called me and said, we found some bone.
Yeah. Well, so just to bring it to the Brain BS podcast and the way we look at things here, it's thoughts create feelings, those lead to actions, and that's what gets the results. And you leaning into those psychics and speaking to Dave and Jack from beyond made you feel certain, or
Yeah.
you tell me, made you feel certain that you were going to find them. Like what was, like, what do you think was the thought and then the feeling that you felt that inspired you to take all the actions that you did? Can you narrow it?
Yeah. So it was in the hospital. So in the hospital, the thought, well, some of the authorities came and said, we're going to keep looking, but you probably want to get it in your head he went to the ocean. And I had the feeling and the thought, like, no, he didn't. I knew in every fiber of my mama bear body, he didn't go to the ocean. I knew it. I just had this. I'm like, no, he didn't. No, he didn't. And then I went and put on my logical hat because I'm a pretty logical gal and methodical. And I realized that my daughter, myself, Jack, and the dog were all inside the house when the mudslide hit, right? And that it broke apart. But being in the house slowed us all down. And Lauren went 1 football field away. I went 2 football fields away. The 90-pound dog went 1 football field away. So why then would Jack be 1.5 miles away? Didn't make sense. He had to be probably within 400 yards, right? My husband was outside the house. He had nothing to slow him down. He was just in that roaring river that was going, I think, 25 miles an hour, right? So he was the furthest victim found out there. And then the university looked up that it was low tide that morning. That means that no one would have gone out to the ocean, right? So my husband was the furthest out because he had nothing to protect him. And he wasn't in the ocean. He was just on the beach, right? So when they said, oh, you got to get it and send it within the ocean, I'm like, no, he didn't. No, he didn't. That's a convenient excuse, right? That makes
I
them feel
love
better.
that. Yeah. So that I remember reading that in the book. You were like, no, didn't go to the ocean. So your thought was he's not in the ocean. So he
I knew he wasn't.
somewhere,
And
right?
then the messages, and then the intuitives, there was different intuitives, right? They didn't know one another, right? But I was keeping all the notes from each of them. They all seemed to say a similar message. He's buried deep. He didn't go to the ocean. You might have just missed him. And something around pieces. And at first in the hospital, if I'd heard pieces, I think I would be in the fetal position. I couldn't have handled it, right? I was expecting a 6 foot tall, intact human. And over the 3 years, I think everything's in divine time. I healed through the search by digging, by looking, by trying. So my son knew I tried my very best. That when they ended up finding some bone, and it was pieces, right? I think he got electrocuted. I was more okay with it. I was just grateful. I'm like, we found something, right? And Montecito is a beautiful area. So if he is buried deep, the rest of him, right? Other parts of him, it's by beautiful coastal oaks and a creek and wildflowers. And so it's beautiful, but I got something, at least I could bury next to his dad to make me, in my humanness, feel some closure.
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine that that's something that would be very important just to have that. But I too, like when I was reading your book, I was like, wow, this really enabled you to anchor your grief in a manageable way. That you
Yeah.
pace it at a pace that worked for you. And even just like some of the stories where they stopped or you saw a tractor going and you were like, I could feel the urgency that you must have. I can't imagine the desperate urgency to not let anything, you had to have
Move.
been trying to control so many different things to
Oh, hyper
make this
vigilant. And I
happen.
knew I couldn't, right? It's 30 square
Right.
miles. There's property owners that weren't living at their damaged home, but called workers in from 40 miles away just to haul the stuff off. So no one was watching the shop. No one was, they were thinking about the dirt in their kitchen. They weren't thinking that that dirt could have 2 missing humans in it. And that was horrific. It was horrific.
Oh, I can't imagine that would, yeah. So how did you deal with that though? Like, so were you able to just, I don't know. I just think the whole
Well, I
thing
mean, you know what I
more.
did? I tried to do, I'm a high control person, but I realized I can't control everything, right? I can just influence. So when I realized I'd stop when I saw the earth movers, and a lot of times there are people who didn't speak English and I don't speak Spanish, and a lot of them spoke Spanish. And so I'm like, okay, what do I do? So I tried to, explain with my hands. I didn't get it. So I went to my late son's Spanish teacher, and I wrote it in English, kind of a little flyer that says, be really careful. And I had an image of Jack and Lauren. Then I grabbed an image of a skeleton buried under the earth so they'd have a visual. and she translated in Spanish. So in my car, I had both English and Spanish flyers I could hand out. And that really helped them because these workers certainly they didn't want to stumble on this without knowing. I mean, imagine. And then what do? You call the fire department if you find that, right? So I did that to try to influence Abe Powell from the Bucket Brigade. He knocked on doors and tried to get to the neighbors to say, hey, be really cautious, when you're doing any removals. So I really tried to do as best I could, and then I was let go and let God. Jack told me he'd be found, right? All I could do was try to influence it and let go and let God, and that was a gift for me too, right?
Yeah.
He said he would be found, and it's all in divine timing, I think.
Yeah, and to let go and let God, I think, is something that is easier to do when we show up as the very best person that we can be. When we've done everything and not left
Yeah.
any stone unturned and do the best we can, that's really all we have control over. We can't.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So let me ask you another question, which I didn't tell you I was going to ask you, but I think you'll be able to handle one from out of nowhere. The thing that I'm really also noticing is you were really busy before, you were taking care of your family, you're volunteering and doing all this stuff for other people.
Hmm.
This whole tragedy has been a huge lesson in learning how to receive.
Absolutely. I didn't know
Right?
how to receive before.
Yeah. So can you speak a little bit
Yeah,
about
I mean, I was
that?
the helper of others. I was the doer. I was the helper. I was the fixer. And with this tragedy, I needed people to carry me when I couldn't carry myself. I couldn't walk. I had to learn to walk again. I was in the hospital 3 weeks. I had two surgeries. My daughter's, she got out of the hospital and needed to get to school, and who's going to get her to school? So I needed people to drive her to school and back. Food and grocery stores and clothes, and more needed a backpack, and needed a rental house. I just had to surrender, and I needed it so much. I took in the help, and that was part of my healing. And um, it's been good, right? Because I really, really needed it, and I now can see both sides to be a giver, caretaker of others, and also be a recipient. And there's value in both, right?
Wow.
When you need it, there's value in both. The
That's how you create
vulnerability is
abundance.
almost,
Yeah,
yeah,
go.
you almost feel vulnerable. Like it's a vulnerability. I had to lean into vulnerability, whereas I wasn't as vulnerable as a person before. I had my guard up. I was corporate Kim, and I had a big, you know, organization that I was working with, and yeah, I just became more humanly vulnerable, which is a good thing.
Yeah, I love that you brought up vulnerability because that is required in order to receive. And then
Yeah,
it's all about give and take and the
yeah.
flow of going in and out, anything, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that's why receiving so important. Well, so how are you and Lauren doing now?
It's one day at a time, absolutely. But I'm after the book came out, I was surprised myself how that shifted me in my um, where I was in life. I was really ready to move forward. I really felt I got the cathartic help out of writing the story. I got the perspective of seeing my journey from desperate grief to more peaceful adaptation, and really, I feel like I honored my husband and my son in it, um, which was helpful for me too. And now I'm really wanting to start my next chapter, because the best way I can honor my husband and son, right, and our family, is to live a joyful, meaningful life, right? Same thing with
Mhm.
Lauren. The best way we can honor, like, they don't want us in a fetal position crying. They don't. I want them brilliantly happy and pure joy up in heaven. And they want us brilliantly happy and pure joy, or as much joy as we can make for ourselves here on earth.
Wow, that's beautiful. And you're totally being a role model
Mhm.
for other people who are in situations where
Yeah.
they're really, really challenged in your ability to. I think as I'm listening to you through this interview and talking to you, because it's the first time I've met you, that one of your gifts is being able to manage your mind in a way
Mm,
that works for you. naturally
Yeah.
without actually having, to it's like a natural gift for you to be able to put things in a way that works for you. And I'm
Yeah.
sure just like everyone else, you have your good days and your bad days.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also I'm gonna look up because I know Lauren has sang at a lot of events since then,
Mm-hmm.
and I still haven't heard her sing. So I'm actually
Oh, you
maybe
can
we
Google her. She's on YouTube. You can Google
yeah,
her.
maybe
She does
we'll
like,
even put a link in the show notes of something that she sang or like all the
yeah.
that's part of the healing too, isn't it?
Oh, it was that was her healing. When she sings, I think she feels the feet on the ground. And yeah, I mean, she sang, Kenny Loggins sang with her, and they did a couple duets, and remarkable human being trying to help. She sang with Katy Perry, Brad Paisley, and she sang at some of the vigils. And she, just you'll know what's that Elvis Presley song? You'll Never Walk Alone. And when she sang that, it moved people because they saw this 14-year-old who had been buried alive under 20 feet of mud for 6 hours emerge like a phoenix from her entombment, and then weeks later singing like at the Kick-Ass Bash. She sang with David Foster. um, she did the national anthem, and it moved them to tears that she could do that. And that's been her healing, is the singing.
Oh, wow. Well, is there anything else that that we didn't touch on yet in the podcast interview here that you would like to let's just for a minute, because I'm a huge dog lover.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Chester. Let's talk
Oh,
about the beginning, how some of the things, because that the scene in the book where it's all about to happen, and you said that you looked at Chester, like nearly destroyed me.
yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
also such a thing with dogs, isn't it?
Yeah. So I grew up with Irish setters. I always had girl Irish setter dogs. And when Scarlett passed away, I wanted another dog. And my husband's like, not another dog and not another Irish setter, because they're so full of energy, but they're like gestures. They're just the sweetest thing, goofy. And he goes, you can get another one if you get a boy dog. And I'm like, a boy dog? They're going to lift their leg when they pee on my hedges, right? And I'm like, I'll get a boy dog then, right? So he was my first male Irish setter, and undoubtedly the best dog I've ever had. He was a show quality Irish setter. Didn't matter that. He was just everyone loved him. In town, he went to the dog camps, and all the staff just loved him. Like, and they actually put his picture up on the wall. Um, he was just so loving and friendly. And before the tragedy, I remember my husband and son came out one time. We were watching TV, and my husband said to my son, it's going to be a sad day in this house when Chester dies, because I was so attached to him. He was my guy, right? Because I worked at home a lot, out of my home office. And so Chester would be at my feet, right? That's my guy. And during the tragedy, he was on the floor, and I'm like, let's go, as the mud was roaring in. And he just looked up to me with kind of hauntingly knowing eyes. Um, I think he knew something, it was going to happen. And he didn't get up. And I watched him um, get covered with mud and die. And that was just horrific, right? And he was just a terrific dog. And fortunately, and this is a silver lining too, I think, that touched me, of the kindness of people. They got back his body was found, and I got, someone handled getting it cremated, and I have the ashes at home. And I just did a book signing at the local bookstore, Chaucer's, and someone left an envelope, and it was a handwritten note in the envelope, and it was the woman at Animal Control, Lisa. And she goes, I was the one who received Chester after he passed. And she said, I just want to tell you how much we loved on him. I cleaned off all the mud on him. I told him how much he was loved by his family. And I put him on a beautiful towel, and I had my hands on him before he went into the crematorium. And that touched me so much, that someone I didn't know, right? And this came out 5 years later at this book signing. She tells me how wonderful the compassion and the reverence in which they treated this so loved family member of ours. It touched me it just touched me so much, and it really signifies the kindness we do for other humans can make such a difference, right? Um, even, I mean, she knew I didn't know about that for 5 years, but she did it, and now I'm just so grateful that as he was, as he was received, he was loved on.
Oh, wow. Like that just actually made me cry. And
Yeah,
it's like when you think about it, it's horrific enough to have lost your dog in this.
yeah,
You experience so much loss.
yeah. Cumulative loss, so much cumulative
Oh,
compounded
it's like,
loss.
and the community around you
Yeah,
lost too. Like it's just like a massive,
it was
so
a community tragedy. It wasn't a Kim Cantin tragedy. It wasn't a Cantin family tragedy. It was a community tragedy. So many people suffered that night. So many people, even if they didn't lose someone, so many people suffered that night.
yeah. Yeah. Well, let's end it on an inspiring note.
Perfect.
What are your plans next for promoting your book or where
Yeah, well, this is my first
find?
book, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not an expert at it, but I am a marketer by background. I'm doing speaking engagements, more speaking engagements. I just got asked to a national convention to come speak next June, and I spoke on Sunday, and people who'd lost people, came up with kind of tears in their eyes saying, "I really needed to hear this." So I'm getting clear that if if what I've experienced and where I am now can help even one or two people, then it's putting purpose to it. And that's a good thing, right? It's making lemonade out of lemons, right?
Yeah.
So I'll be doing that. Still busy as a mom, my daughter's getting off to college. Um, and just trying to lean into my new chapter. I don't know what that all is going to look like. Travel, maybe, you know, um, doing the book interviews, and I value people and connections with people more, so really more deliberately spending time with my friends, right? And scheduling events with friends, I think, is going to be a priority.
Yeah. And you could use the same process that you learned in all this with looking for Jack, the trusting the process and your intuition and divine timing that each step gets revealed to you along the way of what you should do next. So there's
Exactly, and you got to give time. You got to give time, right?
yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing
Oh,
your.
you're welcome. You're welcome. I enjoyed it. Take care now.
Okay, audience, I know you learned something valuable here today. I'll see you next episode. Thanks for being here and learning about Brain BS. I hope you enjoyed listening to the episode as much as I enjoyed creating it for you. If you did, please take a little time to do a quick review, give me 5 stars, and share it with everyone you know. If you're actually interested in being on the podcast yourself or have questions about it, you can find me in the Brain BS podcast community on Facebook. See you next time. Thanks for being here and learning about Brain BS. I hope you enjoyed listening to the episode as much as I enjoyed creating it for you. If you did, please take a little time to do a quick review, give me 5 stars, and share it with everyone you know. If you're actually interested in being on the podcast yourself or have questions about it, you can find me in the Brain BS podcast community on Facebook. See you next time.